The Lord be with you. A reading from the Gospel of Q. Jesus said, "When the owner of an estate wants a manager who can be trusted with all his goods, someone who will make sure that the staff is cared for and fed, whom will he put in charge? A trusty and sensible supervisor. Congratulations to that person if he proves faithful and is hard at work when the owner comes home. In that case, the owner will give him a share of the property. But if the manager says to himself, 'The owner is not coming back for a long time,' and begins abusing the workers and feasting and getting drunk, the owner may return unexpectedly. Instead of receiving a reward, the manager will be cut off and will share the fate of the unfaithful. Do you suppose that I am here to bring peace? No, I have not come to bring peace, but the sword of division. My message will divide father and son, mother and daughter, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Those who prefer their father or mother to me are not deserving, nor are those who prefer their sons and daughters. Unless you carry your own cross and follow me, you are not worthy. Those who grasp and clutch at self will lose it. Those who let go of self and follow me will find it. When you see clouds in the western sky, you say, 'It's going to rain.' And so it does. When the wind blows from the south, you predict scorching weather, and it comes. You know the lay of the land and can read the face of the sky, so why can't you interpret the here and now? Why can't you judge for yourself what is right? When you are headed for court with an opponent, try to settle the case on the way and make peace with him. Otherwise, he will call you before the judge, who may turn you over to the jailer. Then you will not get out of jail until you have paid the very last penny." The Gospel inspired by God. Have any of you here ever heard of Fenway Park? You did? Okay, brilliant. Okay, all the East Coast, all right. Well, I had never heard about it until this week. I was reading an article apropos something completely different, and I came across Fenway Park. And so I Googled it. And I found out it's the home of the Boston Red Sox. Yeah? Lisa, when was it built?
I have no idea.
1912. And the capacity is about, at the moment, it's changed in capacity over the years because of construction. It's now about 35,000 people. And in 2008, they set a record for 456 consecutive home games which were sold out completely. It's a record for the whole franchise. But I came across it in an article that had nothing got to do at all with baseball. I've never seen a baseball game in my life. And the article was using Fenway Park as a metaphor. And it was talking about the world situation and particularly the notion of exponential increase in problems. That when something increases exponentially, it really gets very high really, really quickly, particularly the latter stages of the growth. And he used Fenway Park as a metaphor. And here was the metaphor. He was looking at the world economic order, growth in population, ecological degradation, all these things. He was talking about how much more quickly the speed of degradation is happening. And he said, suppose there was a person with an eyedropper that dispensed just a single drop of water. And this person went into Fenway Park and stood on the pitcher's mound and squeezed out a single drop of water on the pitcher's mound. And at the same time, he had chained you in handcuffs to the top layer of the bleachers. And the whole park is surrounded by bleachers. And he said to you, this is a special kind of drop of water. It increases in volume twofold every minute. So when you put it down, you have a single drop of water. After 1 minute, it's the size of 2 drops. After 2 minutes, it's the size of 4 drops. After 3 minutes, it's the size of 8 drops. After 4 minutes, the size of 16 drops, then 32 drops, etc. And he puts this drop of water down, and you're chained to the top of the bleachers. And just imagine, for the fun of it, that it is waterproof, that it will hold the water. And you're chained in there on January the 1st, 2010, at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. question was this: will you starve to death first, or will you drown as the waters rise? You'll drown. And at what time will you drown? You'll drown on January the 1st, 2010 at 1:49 p.m. It'll only take 49 minutes for that one drop that becomes 2 drops and 4 drops and 8 drops to cover the whole thing and to drown you. 49 minutes is what it will take. But the interesting thing was, and the startling thing to me was, he said, so at 1:49 you're drowned. At 1:44, only 3% of the park is covered in water. Only 3%. But then at 1:45 there's 6%. 1:46 there's 12%. At 1:47 there's 24%. At 1:48 there's 48%. And at 1:49 there's 96% of the park filled. And so the latter stages of the problem really, really grow exponentially. And it was a really interesting metaphor for me to look at, as I look at the world situation and the invitation for us to do something in our times. And as I realized it, I began to think, this is exactly what each of the prophets spoke about in their own particular times. The prophets are people not who can predict the future. That's not their forte. Their forte is that they can see the present more clearly than the rest of us. They really see what's happening. And therefore, they can see where it's headed. But it's because they see clearly. And again and again and again, the prophets throughout history and throughout the scriptural traditions are the people who see very clearly what is, and they warn us not just of impending situations, but that it's increasing exponentially. And this is what Micah was doing today. I want to focus particularly on the reading from Micah. And I'm just going to make 3 main points this morning. I'm going to deal with Didache a little bit, and then the prophet Micah. The first question I asked is fishing for hospitality. It's the first point I'll make. Then the second one I'll ask, was Micah a prophet of doom and gloom? And then thirdly, agreeing with Micah and disagreeing with Micah. So there are the 3 points I'll make this morning. So I can't remember which great American statesman, was it Benjamin Franklin who said that guests are like fish? Was it, he said, yeah? After 3 days they stink. Yeah? We have a similar saying in Swahili. In Swahili, speaking of guests, we say, siku ya kwanza umgeni. The first day you are a guest. Siku ya pili umgeni. The second day you are a guest. Siku ya tatu shika jembe. On the third day you grab a hoe and come dig with the rest of us in the garden. More practical. And so this notion of abusing hospitality, as I think about it, there is no human institution, or there's no great human idea ever in history which hasn't been abused, or which could not be abused. No matter how well it is crafted, or how beautiful, or how spiritual, or how inspiring it is, there will always be some individual or some group who will learn how to abuse it. So you look at some of the great events in human history, some of the great ideas in human history. Like, for instance, take communism. In theory, communism was the idea that every citizen had a right to have their needs met, whether they were housing needs, educational needs, medical needs, whatever they were. It was a brilliant idea. It got corrupted very, very quickly, as we saw. Or you take the notion of capitalism. Capitalism is the beautiful notion that people have the freedom to create their own future, and they're free to become what they want to become. We live in a time in which capitalism has been totally abused. The system has totally abused capitalism. It is not working anymore. We look at Christianity, this extraordinary idea that life is about love and compassion and reaching out prejudice-free to others. And we see what happened to it very quickly, particularly after it became the state religion of Rome. So there's no system or no great idea that can't be and hasn't been abused. And then very specific, this notion of hospitality that Didache is picking up on today. Didache was the first compendium of Christian teaching. It's the first catechism. And allegedly it's ascribed to the very apostles themselves, that the apostles began to record Christian teaching for the generations who would come after them. So it's the first compendium of Christian teaching. And already they're beginning to see difficulties coming out of early Christianity. The notion that Christ says hospitality means that you must accept anybody who comes to you in my name. They begin to realize quickly this is being abused. And it's being abused for 2 reasons, it seems to me. Firstly, there are natural slackers There are lazy people who just don't want to work. And so they can very quickly latch onto this, if I'm a Christian, or I say I'm a Christian, I can go any place I want and get hospitality, free board and keep as long as I want. So that's an attractor for the slackers among us. But much more importantly, there was the notion at the time that Jesus Christ was coming back imminently. That Jesus had died about 30 AD. The expectation was, for the Christian group, he would come back in their lifetime. And particularly when Paul writes his first letter to the Thessalonians, he is very strong on the notion that Christ is coming back imminently, immediately. It might be Tuesday at 3:30, or it could be Wednesday morning. And so a whole bunch of people stopped working. What's the point? If Christ is coming back immediately, why would we train for professions? Why would we work hard? Why would we even worry about the future? And so they began to slack off. And Paul panicked. And Paul wrote his second letter to the Thessalonians. No, you got me wrong. Anybody who doesn't work shouldn't be allowed to eat. You can't just indulge these slackers. So hospitality got abused immediately. There is nothing that can't be abused immediately. And so as I look at it, when I look at the formation of human communities, I don't care what the community is. It can be a startup, an IT startup. It can be a hippie community in the 60s. It can be a book group. It can be anything you want. As soon as a group starts off with the greatest of idealism, there's a tendency, firstly, to start off with great naivete because of the idealism. And at some stage, because the naivete brings us into trouble, then there's the reaction to go towards cynicism. In fact, as I watch the evolution of individual children, it seems to me there are particular bifurcation points. We all start out life as innocent little children. At some stage, maybe on age 9 or 10 or whatever, innocence bifurcates into either age-inappropriate naivete or into idealism. And there are some people who spend the rest of their lives being totally naive, which is inappropriate. They're not equipped for life because of their naivete. It doesn't work. So we go towards idealism. At some stage, perhaps in our 30s, idealism bifurcates into either cynicism and bitterness or into compassion and wisdom. And it is a day-by-day, event-by-event, relationship by relationship decision for people to move from idealism into wisdom and compassion, or to move into cynicism and bitterness. And there's nothing worse, in my opinion, to see somebody in the mature years of their life who have seen it all before, are cynical and embittered about life, rather than creatures of wisdom and love and compassion. That's the temptation for us, for every one of us, as individuals and as systems. And all groups go through this as well, every kind of a group. You start off, a startup company, there's tremendous idealism, people really work very hard, they get on very, very well together, and then at some stage you start to solidify. There are problems that occur, and the naive charter of the founders isn't adequate to the problems that are arising, and so there's a cynical backlash, and you go right over to kind of batten down the hatches. And this happens in all kinds of organizations. And this is happening in the early Christian church. You see the same tendency, the oscillation between naivete and cynicism. There's a third way, of course. There always is a third way. And the third way is to meet changing times with compassion and wisdom and creativity, to maintain our idealism, but to have our idealism move into compassion and wisdom rather than to retrenching and cynicism. So that was my hit on the first reading, the problem that the young Christian community was experiencing vis-a-vis hospitality. My second point then is the prophet Micah. Was he a prophet of doom and gloom, or who was he? Let me give you a little bit of the background to him. Micah flourished around the same time as the great prophet, the more famous prophet, Isaiah. And so he would have flourished around 740 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. And he was from the southern kingdom of Judah, but he was a country yokel. He was a country boy. He wasn't a city slicker. Isaiah was the prince of the realm. Micah was a country boy, but an extraordinarily beautiful prophet for his time. And he saw the situation in which he lived, and it was a situation in which a rich oligarchy was totally abusing the serfs, a situation in where merchants were using corrupt practices, a situation in where judges were agreeing to be bribed in order to give decisions, and a situation in which the priesthood of the time and the other prophets were completely corrupted, and they were saying what the status quo wanted them to say. Not the unpopular truth, but what the status quo wanted to hear. And Micah inveighed mightily against these people. He wrote this beautiful book, which basically divides into 3 parts. The first part is a condemnation of the social situation he sees. the ruling class, the merchant class, the priest, and the prophet class. The second part of his book is about his new vision for Zion. What will happen, when Mashiach comes. And the third piece is set in the form of a court case in which God is accusing his people of infidelity, and God is bringing a court case, literally, and God is the plaintiff. And the accusation is that Israel has breached the covenant between them. So the book is divided into 3 parts. So it's a really, really powerful book. Now there's an interesting piece right at the end of today's reading where he says, your ordeal will come from the north. What's the meaning of this historically? Historically, at this particular period of Middle Eastern history, the great empire was the Assyrian Empire, which was to the north and to the east of the land of Israel. And indeed, in the year 721, the Assyrians came in and they demolished the northern kingdom of Israel, deporting the 10 northern tribes who vanished without trace from the pages of history. So Micah could foresee this. Now, about 120 years after Micah, the other very famous prophet, Jeremiah, would credit Micah's prophecy for the changes that came in Israel. He would credit the great changes that came under the king Hezekiah, he attributed them to the preaching of Micah. You'll find this in Jeremiah chapter 26, verse 17. And so it seems like Micah had an effect in his time. The powers that be began to listen and they began to change. And although the northern kingdom fell, the southern kingdom of Judah survived for another 130 years before the Babylonians came in and took it over. So this was the character of Micah. Now, the third question I want to ask myself then is, this Micah, do I agree with him or disagree with him? I agree with a lot of what he's saying, and there are things about him that I don't agree with. Firstly, his description today. If you read this description and you didn't know its source, and you didn't know from what period of history it came, and you were to ask yourself the question, I wonder when was this written, by whom, in what stage of human history? And if you know human history, there would have been many, many, many times throughout human history when this would have been a very accurate description of how the vast bulk of a population was actually living under the heel of a rich, careless oligarchy, subject to all kinds of economic vicissitude, finding life really, really difficult, where the religion of their time isn't supporting them, and the people who should be the prophets for their time are silent or supporting the status quo. You can see this right throughout European history, the Middle Ages particularly. You can see it in the history of Africa. And the frightening thing is, if your eyes are really open, you can see it in our own times. There are people on planet Earth, millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people for whom that is the current reality. They live in this kind of regime. There are millions of people in our own country, and that is their reality. People who can't get health insurance, people who are losing their homes through foreclosure, people for whom it seems the leadership isn't interested. So at our own times and all times of human history, this would be a very accurate description of the experience of millions of our fellow citizens and perhaps even billions of our planetary citizens. So I agree totally with Micah that that is a description, an accurate description of the human experience of many people throughout history and right now. The only place I would disagree with Micah is the assumptions underlying what the causes of this were or what the responses of this might be. In the very, very last line of today's reading, he will say, in a sense, that God is using a foreign power to punish his own people for their sins. So he's using a foreign power, Assyria, to punish Israel for the breach of the covenant. Now there's two assumptions embedded in that I disagree with very significantly. The first assumption is that there is a chosen people, that God plays favorites. That's a hidden assumption there that I disagree totally with. And it's been my experience and my belief system that this notion of chosenness is one of the ideas that has really divided humanity against itself. It is what has divided individual from individual, the notion that one is special and the other is not. It has divided tribe from tribe. It has divided nation from nation. It has divided religion from religion. It's divided the ruling classes from the serfs, the oligarchy from the slaves. And most importantly of all, perhaps, it's divided humans against nature. This notion that there's some chosen and there's some not chosen. This is a notion embedded in much of biblical thinking with which I disagree with significantly. There is nobody special. The God of all, the mother, father of all, articulates herself equally in all of our creation. All the ways from sea anemones to avatars. There is nothing between a quark and a galaxy which is not a word of God made flesh. And to insist that there are some species, human beings for instance, or there's some group, Catholics or Jews or whatever, who are specially beloved of this God has been the reason for so much bloodshed in our world. So we need to let go of that anthem and let go of that mantra that there's a chosen people, especially beloved of God, who are destined to be saved while the other group is destined to be lost. That we need to work with. And the second assumption embedded into this is that God intervenes and he uses foreign powers to punish his own people for the breach of the contract. My belief is that God does not intervene at all. The source of all that is does not intervene in how the universe or the universes continue to evolve and play out their patterns. Rather, built into this extraordinarily elegant evolutionary model are navigational aids. And I want to mention just 3 of them this morning. Built into this evolutionary model by the source of all that is, who does not intervene in any way apart from this, are navigational aids that allow us to find our way through this. And the first one of these I call a preconception contract, and the second one is free will, and the third one is karma. So let me say a little bit about each of the 3 of them. I believe rather that souls before incarnation make what I've been calling preconception contracts as little groups. That a group of souls will agree to incarnate at roughly the same time. They will be assigned by each other or by themselves particular roles and particular relationships, and they'll have a particular mission. And the agreement is we will come together onto planet Earth at roughly the same time. We will have particular roles. It might be father-son relationship or husband-wife relationship. And we will have particular missions. And we will create a life drama, an incarnational long life drama, which affords each one of us the ideal opportunity to do what we've come to do, to learn what we've come to learn, and to contribute what we've come to contribute. And we do this in small little soul pods of maybe family groups or friendship groups. But we do it at another level. We do it, I believe, at a national level. That there's a preconception contract that people who will wind up as fellow citizens of a nation at a particular period of the nation's history are here by preconception agreement. That we have come to do something. In our instance, we have come here to be American citizens at this period of American history because we have something to contribute to America and something to contribute to the world. And obviously it's not about oligarchy, it's not about military conquest, it's not about economic degradation, it's about love and compassion and utilizing our resources for the benefit of all of our citizens and for the benefits of the world citizenry as well. And ultimately, there is a preconception contract that involves all 6.5 billion human beings on the planet. None of us is here accidentally. All of us are here because we made an agreement to be on planet Earth at this extraordinarily important time in world history in order to create the kind of environment and a kind of a model whereby humans can coexist on planet Earth in a way that ushers in Christ consciousness and builds upon our Buddha nature. So that's the first great navigational aid. The realization that none of this is happening by chance. Not at a little group level, not at a family level, not at a national level, and not as a global level. We are here by agreement. And the sooner we wake up to the realization as individuals and as communities and as nations and as a global community, the more quickly we will deal and take off the handcuffs before Fenway Park gets flooded. The second great navigational aid, I believe, is free will. And free will was this extraordinary tweak that God at some stage gave to this evolutionary process. Now, maybe we're the only creatures in the universe with free will. Or maybe there are many, many other sentient beings out there who have free will. But we know that we have free will. But free will is kind of the wild card in the pack. Because it's the card that allows us to come into the fullest possible alignment with Source or to be totally misaligned from Source. Nothing else can be radically misaligned from Source. Flowers can't. Dinosaurs couldn't. Nothing can be misaligned from Source because they're operating only through instinct. Human beings are the first species on this planet that we know of who have the ability to align totally, consciously, and with the fullest awareness with Source, or to radically misalign ourselves with Source. All great creativity has come from the exercise of this aligning with Source. And all violence in our world has come from the misalignment with Source. There's the second great card. Free will, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, needs to move into freedom. And there's a big difference between free will and freedom. Free will is merely the right to exercise my own prerogatives and do as I wish. Freedom is the ability to do as Source wishes. So the truly free person is the person who always chooses the good. That's the Catholic theological definition of freedom. Freedom is the ability to choose the good. Free will is the ability to choose whatever I want. I'm only truly free to the extent that I choose the good, because only then am I in alignment with my core nature. So free will is a second great navigational tool that we've been given in order to bring our times and ourselves, our world and our models into the fullest possible alignment with the evolutionary thrust of spirit. And the third great navigational tool would be karma, which is frequently misunderstood. We think karma is a punitive edict whereby we're punished in subsequent lifetimes for sins of previous lifetimes. This has nothing got to do with punishment. It is totally an educative model. It's the ability to read the signs of the time, to learn how the game works. And it is at the same time both completely impersonal and totally personal. It's impersonal in the sense that it does not play favorites. If A leads to B, it always leads to B. If you do A, you get B. God does not play favorites. But it is totally personal in the sense that the future is always predicated on my actions in the present. And so I create, so it's personal to me because karma gives me immediate feedback as to my thoughts, my words, and my actions. Now, so there's a few different ways of trying to learn what the game of life. When we come onto planet Earth, unfortunately, there is amnesia created within us for who we really are. Firstly, we have let go of cosmic consciousness, and now we're operating from a 3-pound brain. We have let go of eternity and timelessness, and we're operating in chronology, in strict chronology. We've let go of utter spacelessness, and we're confined to these dense little spacesuits. And the biggest one of all, there is amnesia created in us for who we are, where home is, and what we've come to do. Karma is one of the ways of finding out how this game works, for rolling back the amnesia. If you don't mind me mixing my sporting metaphors, if you attended a basketball game for the first time in your life, you'd never heard of basketball in the past, and suddenly you're in an arena and you're watching these guys play this particular game, and you're trying to figure out what are the rules of engagement. There would be 3 ways you could find out. You could go and get a book from the library and you could study what the rules of basketball are. That's one way of doing it. Or you could approach the coach and say, "Coach, can you tell me what the rules of engagement are?" And the coach could tutor you. Or if you attended enough games, you could infer from the consequences what the rules were. Now all 3 are available to us. As we try to figure out this cosmic game of incarnation and what we're doing on planet Earth, we have all these 3 modalities open to us. There's a manual. There are many manuals. We call them the wisdom traditions of the planet. The wisdom of past generations who said, when you do this, here's what tends to happen. When you do that, here's what tends to occur. So there is the manuals of wisdom from all the great traditions. There are the coaches available to us. There are the Christ figures and the Buddha figures and maybe even current people in our life who are teachers for us. And most importantly of all, there's the fact that God gave us intelligence so we can infer from the consequences of our actions as individuals, as nations, and as a world community what works for us and what doesn't work for us.